On Sunday, June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched one of the most enormous military attacks in history. More than 3.8 million Axis troops surged into the Western Soviet Union across a front stretching roughly 2,900 kilometers, from the Baltic region in the north to the Black Sea in the south. The invasion was called Operation Barbarossa, named after Frederick Barbarossa, the medieval Holy Roman Emperor. But this was not merely a military campaign for territory. It was the opening of a new and catastrophic phase of World War II, the Eastern Front, which would become the largest and deadliest land war ever fought. In the first weeks, the attack seemed unstoppable. German armies smashed through border defenses, destroyed aircraft on the ground, and encircled vast Soviet formations. Yet within months, the same offensive that looked like a triumph would become the beginning of Nazi Germany's strategic disaster. To understand Barbarossa, it is important to see that Hitler's war against the Soviet Union was driven by both strategy and ideology. Nazi Germany wanted land, food, oil, and raw materials, but it also wanted to destroy communism and reshape Eastern Europe according to Nazi racial ideas. The long-term plan, known as General Plan Ost, imagined the removal, enslavement, Germanization, or murder of millions of Slavic people so that German settlers could occupy the region. Ukraine's grain, the mineral resources of Belarusia, and the oil of the Caucasus were all viewed as prizes that could sustain a vast German empire. This made the invasion different from a conventional war between states. From the beginning, it was planned as a war of annihilation, where military conquest was tied to occupation, mass violence, starvation policies, deportation, and genocide. The attack was also shocking because, less than 2 years earlier, Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union had signed political and economic agreements. The 1939 Nazi-Soviet Pact helped both powers pursue short-term goals. Germany avoided a two-front war while it attacked Poland and later Western Europe, while the Soviet Union gained time and territory in Eastern Europe. But the partnership was always unstable. Hitler had long considered the Soviet Union a future target, and tensions increased after Soviet expansion into Bessarabia and northern Bukovina in 1940. By December of that year, Hitler approved plans for an invasion. German leaders believed the Red Army could be destroyed quickly, perhaps within a few months. Their confidence was strengthened by earlier victories in Poland, France, and the Balkans, where fast-moving armored warfare had shattered opponents before they could recover. On the Soviet side, the danger was real, but the response was dangerously hesitant. Joseph Stalin received repeated warnings that Germany was preparing to attack. Intelligence came from multiple sources, and German troop concentrations near the border were impossible to ignore. Yet Stalin feared that ordering full mobilization might provoke Hitler and give Germany an excuse for war. The Red Army was also still recovering from purges of its officer corps and was in the middle of reorganization and modernization. Many Soviet units near the frontier were poorly positioned, under strength, or not ready for immediate combat. Aircraft were often clustered at exposed airfields, supply systems were incomplete, and command structures were uncertain. When the invasion came, many Soviet formations were not simply defeated in battle. They were caught before they had a chance to organize a coherent defense. Operation Barbarossa began with a massive combination of airstrikes, artillery, and ground assaults. German forces were organized into 3 major army groups. Army Group North advanced through the Baltic region toward Leningrad. Army Group Center, the strongest of the 3, drove through Belarus toward Smolensk and ultimately Moscow. Army Group South moved into Ukraine, where the Germans expected to seize agricultural wealth and major industrial areas. The early results were devastating for the Soviet Union. German aircraft destroyed large numbers of Soviet planes, many before they could take off. Panzer groups punched deep behind the front, while infantry followed to close encirclements. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were trapped in pockets. To German commanders, these victories seemed to confirm that the campaign was proceeding according to plan. But the scale of the territory and the depth of Soviet manpower were already beginning to complicate the timetable. In the north, Army Group North moved rapidly through the Baltic lands. Its objective was Leningrad, a city of enormous symbolic and strategic importance. Leningrad was the cradle of the Bolshevik Revolution and a major industrial and naval center. By early September 1941, German forces, with Finnish forces operating to the north, had effectively cut off the city. The siege of Leningrad began on September 8 and would last until 1944. Rather than storm the city immediately, German policy aimed to isolate and starve it. The siege became one of the most horrific episodes of the war, with civilians trapped under bombardment, cold, hunger, and disease. Barbarossa had promised quick victory, but at Leningrad it produced a long campaign of suffering and endurance. The city did not fall, and its survival became a symbol of Soviet resistance. In the center, Army Group Center achieved some of the most dramatic early successes. It captured Minsk, then pushed towards Smolensk, which fell in late July. These victories created huge Soviet losses and seemed to open the road to Moscow. But every mile east made the German advance harder to sustain. Supply lines stretched over damaged roads and railways built to a different gauge than Germany's. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, and food had to travel immense distances through territory wrecked by retreat and battle. Meanwhile, Soviet armies, even after terrible defeats, kept forming new lines. The Red Army absorbed blows that German planners had assumed would be fatal. By the time the drive on Moscow began in earnest on October 2, the Germans were still powerful, but the campaign had already lasted longer and cost more than expected. In the south, Army Group South faced tougher terrain, larger Soviet forces, and a more complicated campaign. Its targets included Ukraine, the Donbass, Crimea, and eventually the approaches to the Caucasus. Kiev became the site of one of the largest encirclement battles in history. The city was captured on September 19, 1941, after huge numbers of Soviet troops were trapped. Later, Kharkov fell on October 24, and Rostov-on-Don was taken on November 20. Much of Crimea was captured, while Sevastopol was placed under siege. These were major operational victories. They gave Germany control over important regions and inflicted enormous losses on the Red Army. But they also consumed time, fuel, and manpower. The farther Germany advanced, the more it had to occupy, guard, and supply, turning each success into a new burden. The human cost of Barbarossa was staggering from the beginning. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured during the first year of the Eastern Front. Nazi policy treated many prisoners not as protected combatants, but as ideological and racial enemies. Around 3.3 million Soviet prisoners of war were deliberately starved to death or otherwise killed during the war. Civilians also suffered massively under occupation. German paramilitary death squads, along with collaborators, carried out mass shootings and gassing operations, murdering over 1 million Soviet Jews as part of the Holocaust. Villages, towns, and cities became sites of reprisal killings, forced labor, and starvation policies. This brutality was not a side effect of the campaign, it was built into the way Nazi Germany intended to wage war in the East. Barbarossa opened not only a military front, but a zone of systematic mass murder. By autumn 1941, the invasion entered a new phase. The German army was still advancing, but the conditions were worsening. Rain turned roads into mud, a seasonal problem known as Rasputitsa, slowing vehicles, horses, and supply columns. Tanks and trucks broke down faster than they could be repaired. Troops were exhausted from months of continuous fighting. Many German soldiers had not been properly equipped for a long campaign in Russia, especially not for winter. At the same time, Soviet resistance hardened. Factories were moved east beyond the Ural Mountains, new units were raised, and the Soviet state used every tool available to keep fighting. German leaders had planned for a short war of destruction. Instead, they were being pulled into exactly the kind of long war of attrition that Germany was least prepared to win. The decisive moment came outside Moscow. Operation Typhoon, the German drive toward the Soviet capital, began on October 2. At first, German forces again achieved major encirclements and advanced toward the city. Panic spread in Moscow, and parts of the government and industry were evacuated. But the Soviet leadership stayed, defenses were organized, and fresh forces arrived. By early December, German units were at the outskirts of Moscow, but they were exhausted, undersupplied, and freezing. On December 5, the Soviet Union launched a major counteroffensive. German troops, who had expected final victory before winter, were suddenly forced backward. Moscow did not fall. The failure to capture the capital did not mean Germany had lost the war immediately, but it destroyed the idea that the Soviet Union could be defeated in one swift campaign. Operation Barbarossa ended as a paradox. Operationally, Germany had won enormous victories. It occupied vast territories, captured major cities, seized economic regions, and inflicted catastrophic losses on the Red Army. But strategically, it failed. The Soviet state did not collapse. The Red Army survived, adapted, and continued fighting. Germany had opened a front so large and costly that it drained men, machines, fuel, and time. After Barbarossa, the Wehrmacht could no longer attack everywhere at once. Later offensives, such as Case Blue in 1942 and Operation Citadel in 1943, were narrower attempts to regain the initiative, and they too would fail. Barbarossa transformed World War II. It brought the Soviet Union fully into the Allied war effort, created the deadliest battlefield in history, and marked the moment when Hitler's war began to outrun Germany's ability to sustain it. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.